Welcome back. Dr. Jason Plotsky here. And one of the questions we get frequently, we want to clear this up a little bit because a lot of people will ask us what the difference between low carb and keto and paleo is, okay? So I'm going to go through this for you and hopefully this makes a lot of sense. Now, this is also part of our evolution. So one of the first things that we did probably, I would say 8 or 9 years ago, and this was on the advice of a naturopathic doctor I was seeing at the time. So we had my blood work that I had from my family doc, and we were just going through it. And he said, geez, looking at you, because I know how you exercise, and I was, fairly fit at the time. He said, your blood sugar is much higher than it should be. So tell me more about what you're eating. And at that time, we had transitioned away from regular wheat to like sprouted products. So sprouted wheat, sprouted grains, but I was still eating a fair number of carbs in the morning and through the day. So like a normal breakfast for me at that time would have been, this Ezekiel bread or something sprouted with some type of almond butter. And I was eating that pretty frequently. But what I didn't know is that all that stuff still affects your blood sugar. So, and we had young kids, so sometimes we had juice for them that, it was around. I didn't drink it a lot, but I did drink some of it. So we really started to get really clear on all of those hidden sources of carbs for me. And he said, have you ever checked out paleo? And I said, well, I know what it is, but I've never really done it. So he said, why don't you try for 30 days and see how your body reacts? So what paleo is basically a diet that would mimic what our ancestors ate many, many thousands of years ago, like in Paleolithic, era. So if you think back to what was around at that time, it's mimicking those types of things, okay? So there weren't grains around. So one of the first things that paleo says is let's get all the grains and sugar out of your diet, okay? And at that time, people didn't consume a lot of dairy products either. So it would take out, all dairy products. The last thing that it would take out is legumes because they were not in abundance at that time. And the legumes, the idea is that they have these proteins on them called lectins that create a lot of disturbance in your digestive tract. So basically what paleo is a method of eating that takes out grains and sugar, dairy, and legumes, okay? So that's what paleo, that's how I would define it. Now, how would we define low carb? Well, I'm gonna flip over to this end. Low carb would be it's maybe more moderate, okay? Some people would find different parts of this very difficult to do, right? They might find it difficult to completely eliminate different food groups. Now, I can also tell you for some people, this is going to be the pathway to better health. Getting out all grains and all dairy for a lot of people is going to reduce the inflammation in your body, and that could be something that you need to do to kind of kickstart your health. What low carb is basically limiting, so there's no limit on paleo in terms of how many grams of carbs per day that you would consume. It would basically say, okay, eliminate all these, but here's your food groups that you can eat, and there's no limits to the amount of carbohydrates. So, there's no limit to the sweet potatoes or the fruits like bananas and things like that. So they would eliminate the grains and the sugar, but have no limits necessarily on the fruits or some of the root vegetables. Where low carb would say, okay, you can only eat, let's say 60 grams, 70 grams of carbs per day. That's it. So you would start to take out as many of these things as possible, and you would limit per day the total number of carbohydrates you would take in. Now, keto, on the other hand, is the most restrictive in terms of carbohydrates. And what this says is that for most people, you'd have to be under 50 grams of total carbs per day or less. Okay, so it is quite restrictive. Now, I've done all 3 of these programs. Okay, now I think what's helpful is depending on where you are, I always think there's always another level. So I teach very specific programs. I have a whole online course on this low carb. I have an online course on keto. That's how much detail is required to explain this and help people go through this. I do in-office workshops on both of these things because I think it's that important, because it can really help control things like your blood sugar, which has a massive impact on a lot of other functions in your body. So just a quick study that we put here, they looked at these 3 groups of people and said, okay, these are the people that were I've got this. Hold on just one second. I put this backwards. Oh no, I got it. Okay. We just need a quick cut there. Okay. So if we look at this study they did, okay, ketones are basically formed in the body when your body's burning fat. So what they measured was the amount of ketones in the body, and they compared to the fat loss that occurred. And so for some people, this is why the ketogenic diet can be a very powerful tool for weight loss and for fat loss, because essentially what happens is you start burning your body fat as a fuel source. So essentially it went like this: the fewer carbohydrates they consumed, the ketone levels went up and fat loss went up. So there was a direct correlation there. When we went low carb, so for some people in this 60 range, that would be enough that your body starts making enough ketones that it is burning fat as a fuel source, but there weren't as many ketones in the blood, and as a result of that, there wasn't as much fat loss, but still considerable fat loss. And in the paleo group, because there's no limit to the amount of carbohydrates you consume, it's still really, for a lot of people, a very healthy way to eat. But because there's no limit on the amount of carbohydrates, there wasn't a change in ketone levels, and thus a change, as much of a drastic change in fat loss. So you will see though, and I've seen this with a lot of patients, that if you take out the grains, particularly because they are really high glycemic, you will see a massive difference in visceral fat loss, or like belly fat. So that's part of the program that we teach, that we say, okay, well, let's try and get as many, especially all the sugars and as many of the bad carbs out of your diet as possible, and put some restriction on that. A lot of people will lose like 15 pounds in a couple months, right? I've had some people lose as much as 50 pounds just by going low carb and really just monitoring, what they put into their mouths. We've had a ton of people with some success on the keto program. We've had type 2 diabetics that have basically gotten rid of some or all of their medication following one or two of these protocols. So this is a great place to start. It is restrictive. What a lot of people will do is like a 30-day challenge, or something called the Whole30, which is 30 days of, eliminating those particular food groups like grains, dairy, sugar, and legumes. I consider this the low carb. This is kind of like a lifestyle. It's one of those things that when you learn how to eat this way, it's really easy to follow multiple days of the week. And I use keto for either weeks at a time, or I know when I'm fasting, I can get my body into ketosis, which then puts me into this, this high level of fat loss. So from a food group explanation, that's what they are. I have specific programs if you need more information on the low carb or the keto. It's out there. It is complicated, so that we did dedicate a whole set of learning to each of those topics.